With China, as you know, against my statement, they put a 34% tariff on above what their ridiculous tariffs were already. We're putting a 50% tariff on above the tariffs that we put on. We lose hundreds of billions of dollars a year on trade to China. It's just not going to happen. And hopefully we'll get along with China. If we do, that's great. And if we don't, that's okay, too.
Okay. He's dead serious about it. He's been serious about China for a long time. Let's talk to Gordon about it. Gordon Chang knows more about China than anybody I know, author of a book you should probably be reading called Plan Red. Okay, Gordon, Donald Trump has been hot on the Chinese issue for a long time, and he's been speaking lately a lot about how they're ripping us off. Can you give us more depth on that? What does that mean? How are they ripping us off? What are they doing?
They're running persistent merchandise trade surpluses against the U.S. So, for instance, last year, the merchandise trade surplus that China had was $295.4 billion. That was up something like 5.8% from 2023. And this is a result of predatory trade practices, but also criminal acts. So China's been stealing hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. intellectual property each year, perhaps as much as $500 billion annually. And so, yes, President Trump is right. They've been ripping us off.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on stealing intellectual property? Because people don't understand how gigantic this issue is and how pervasive China is when it comes to it. It's like a national pastime over there.
Yes. Just to give you an example, DeepSeek, which is the Chinese open AI platform, they trained their large language model by ChatGPT-4. And by doing so, they violated OpenAI's terms of service. That's a U.S. company. And this has implications because DeepSeek looks like a Chinese government lab project, even though it's supposed to be a private company. The claims that they made for DeepSeek, which were intended to injure the United States, those claims appear to be false. But what they're trying to do is to destroy American business. And they do it very well. And they take intellectual property in so many different ways. But this is pervasive, and it's gone on over the course of decades.
Okay, Gordon, what's China's financial situation like? And I ask because it's clear, at least from their rhetoric over there, that they're not going to back off on this little trade war dust-up thing. They're going to engage. But their economy isn't exactly going gangbusters either, is it?
No. They reported 5.0% growth for 2024. That was an obvious exaggeration. It was probably about 1 or 1.5%. There's been an obvious deterioration between then and now. So China's probably around 0. But even if China were growing at 5.0, it would not be growing fast enough to pay back all the debt that China's accumulated, especially since 2008. And if you want to put this in simple terms, I think that China's experiencing its 2008 now. The reason why this is so critical for China is because Xi Jinping has turned his back on consumption as the fundamental basis of the Chinese economy, which means his only way out of a serious situation is to export more. And President Trump, with his tariffs that have gone into effect today and before, now has 100%, more than 100% tariff rate on Chinese goods. That means shutting off the U.S. market for many, if not most, of China's products.
Okay, Gordon, could you elaborate what that means for the American consumer? There are people understandably nervous right now, having a hard time making ends meet and thinking about the prospect of everything in their life getting more expensive.
Yeah, there's certainly it's going to get a little bit more expensive, but not to the extent that people think. So, for instance, in 2018, when Trump put his first round of elevated China tariffs in place, China picked up somewhere between 75 to 81% of the cost of those tariffs through various means, through weakening currency, through increased subsidies. So American consumers didn't feel that. Now, this time, China has more incentive to pay for Trump's tariffs. And they're starting to do that, again, by allowing the renminbi to go to lower levels, but also by increased subsidies to exporters to the U.S. Ultimately, at 104 or 115% tariff level, American consumers will feel some of it. But we got to remember that tariffs at those levels redirect trade to other countries where the tariff rates aren't so high. So I don't think the American consumer is going to notice it. And in any event, it's not going to be substantial.
Okay, what other countries, and this is a completely loaded question because China controls a lot of other countries.
What other countries what?
What other country, where's the trade going to go? Meaning, is it going to drive it into a country? Yeah.
Yeah, basically everywhere. So you're talking Bangladesh, Vietnam, maybe India, Mexico, a lot of other different places, Central America, especially if we amend our trade agreement with the region. These are places where there's low cost of manufacturing and countries that are not nearly as hostile to the U.S. as China is. So if you were to go, let's say 15 years ago, and you were to go to a Walmart and look at where their apparel was made, it was almost all China. If you went there like about 5 to 7, maybe even 10 years ago, it was almost not at all China. And we're going to see the same thing for a lot of other products as these tariffs are put in place, which encourage countries to move their supply chains to different locations.
Okay, so countries like Vietnam. Vietnam's a communist country. China is a communist country. Vietnam has shown a willingness already to work with us. At least they've talked about that. But I would assume China's going to have some say-so in that.
Well, China will have some say-so because a lot of the new factories in Vietnam are actually Chinese-owned. But, Vietnam, although it is a communist country, is quite friendly to the United States. And so Vietnam has its own issues with China, which are in many ways more serious than ours. So, in effect, Vietnam is a friend of the United States because we both have a common enemy. And when we all look at it, these other places are going to be much better for us, especially for countries that are close to us. So if we're talking about countries in our region, this is a win for the United States from many different perspectives, because not only do we get factories out of our enemy, China, but we also put them in places where our supply chains are much shorter. And by the way, for people who are worried about climate change, that's a really good thing to have a factory in Mexico rather than on the other side of the Pacific.
Yeah, I'm not worried about climate change at all, though. All right, let's talk about militaries. Trump said this.
China has a massive surplus that they take and they spend on their military. Well, we don't want that. I don't want them to take $500, $600 billion a year and spend it on their military.
Gordon,
Yes.
How strong is China's military? Not where it's going, but where is it? I know they put a lot of attack subs in the water. I know they're building up a Navy. I know they're supposedly building up an amphibious force. Everyone thinks that's about Taiwan. I'm sure it probably is. But where are they compared to us?
China's military, even though, for instance, its Navy is larger, and despite all the real problems in the American Navy and Air Force, their military is not nearly as capable as ours. But remember, if it's a war in Taiwan or the Philippines or Japan, they're a lot closer, and their supply chains are supply lines are a lot shorter than ours. The problem that with the Chinese military, two of them. First of all, the Chinese military right now is fighting with itself. We see these purges and counter purges, and it appears that the enemies of Xi Jinping are purging Xi Jinping's loyalists at the top of the Chinese military, which means that military is a mess. But even in the best of times, when they're not trying to kill each other, China's got a communist military, which means it's got two separate reporting lines, one political, one military. And the political one is more important, and that's no way to run a war. China will do very well in the first week of war because everything's been planned out. Nobody has any discretion. It all goes according to plan, more or less. But the problem for China is the second week of war when they are attacked, because that type of military is not flexible and cannot make the decisions that are necessary to react to an attack.
Gordon, I know it's kind of a nerdy, wonky military detail, but it matters. What do we know about their officer corps? Are they capable, sharp? Is it? You make it sound like look. It sounds like a standard communist army where everyone's too afraid to put peanut butter on a cracker so no one can make a decision. What are they?
Well, they've been rehearsing a lot, as we've seen with these, for instance, exercises off Taiwan, which look like rehearsals for war. So they're very good at low-level provocations. But I don't think that they are ready right now to launch hostilities with an invasion of the main island of Taiwan. And there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, their officer corps at the top is not unified. But there's another reason, and that is if Xi Jinping were to launch a major operation, he'd have to give some general or admiral almost complete control over the Chinese military, which makes that flag officer the most powerful person in China. Even in the best of times, Xi Jinping is not willing to do that. And he's certainly not willing to do it now where the large portions of the military are opposed to him. So it's got a lot of tanks. It's got a lot of ships, a lot of planes. It's got some weapons that we don't have, like hypersonic cruise missiles. But the point is that the officer corps, I don't think, is ready to go to war. Remember, these guys have not gone to war since 1979. And in 1979, Vietnam, which we just talked about, Vietnam kicked China's first string military and humiliated it with Vietnam's third string. That shows you that China's not really that good.
Huh. Well, that's inspiring. Are they going to take Taiwan?
I don't think that they're going to launch an invasion with one of the main island of Taiwan, but that doesn't mean the Chinese military won't be fighting in Taiwan. And the reason is that I think that there could very well be a low-level provocation in places such as the South China Sea that spiral out of control. I don't think Xi Jinping can control escalation. And once a war starts someplace, and it can be any place, it will spread throughout the entire region because America and its friends will all gang up, and China will then bring in Russia and North Korea. So we are going to have region-wide war if it starts someplace. Remember, Xi Jinping has configured his political system so that only the most belligerent answers are considered acceptable, which means they can't be able to deal with an incident. So that's the reason why I think it's a small provocation that spirals into a major war, not Xi Jinping waking up someday and saying, I'm invading Japan.
Gordon, we appreciate your wisdom as always. Thank you, sir. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.